Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Roald Dahl Retrospective, where we're going to be taking a look at every single adaptation of Roald Dahl's shorts and books. I am Patricia.
And I am Arun.
And today we are going to go into the proper order of the adaptations by discussing about the very first movie adaptation. Today we're going to be talking about the 1965 film 36 Hours, which was based off of a 1944 short written by Roald Dahl called Beware of the Dog.
Mm-hmm. And there's this film really, I would say you're just reacting to it. It is a bit of a mixed bag, and so there are some stuff I do like about it, and there are some stuff I don't like about it. I mean, I guess you could say some of it is obviously an element of its time, but then there are other bits of it which I think are actually, I guess you could say, quite clever, and I guess you could say were kind of I guess you could say were breakthroughs at the time of when they did this. But let's go through it and let's see what we think.
All right, here we go. So as mentioned before, 36 Hours was based off of a short story called Beware of the Dog. Beware of the Dog stars an RAF pilot by the name of Peter Williamson, who sustained a serious injury while flying on a mission over to France. And while he injected himself, he landed himself in the hospital in Brighton, and he finds himself having his leg amputated. And he's speaking to a nurse who is discussing about how, he's in this hospital, he needs to get some rest. And then, Peter started to notice some weird things going on about how the water is a little bit off and that some of the people are acting strange. But then as time goes on, he starts to suspect something is going wrong when he sees a sign outside that says Gardez au chien, which is French for beware of the dog. So he knows that he's not in Brighton, he's still in France. And the people who have been taking care of him are actually Germans in disguise as British soldiers. And the short story ends with him being interrogated. So basically, they decided to take this concept of the short story and adapt it into a full-length film. And this isn't the first time in which, you have adaptations based off of his shorts. Like, for example, there have been many cases in which Beware of the Dog has been adapted. One was this, obviously, and then another one, which would be a TV movie that came out close to 20 years later called Breaking Point, which we'll discuss about another time. So have you had a chance to actually read the short story, Aaron?
I'll be honest with you, I haven't actually had a chance to actually read the short, but I have actually watched the 36 Hours movie, and I guess for me, you can definitely tell there are some elements of a Roald Dahl, I guess you could say Roald Dahl film in this. I mean, there is the imagination that's in this. You see, things like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and the BFG, and we're not really talking about fantasy elements. We're kind of talking about a construct that is very complex and has very many elements to it, and but at the same time can also kind of be easily understood. And so it's it definitely has a lot of Roald Dahl's kind of hallmarks attached to it, and so even though it's I guess you could say it's what Roald Dahl wrote, but then was readapted, obviously, to have American tones and have various other aspects put into it as well. You could definitely tell that Roald Dahl, even if it didn't have his name on it, had some kind of element, had some kind of inspiration on what was then put on the screen.
Right, exactly. So, 36 Hours was a 1965 film, and it stars James Garner, Eva Marie Saint, and Rod Taylor. So, very similar to Beware of the Dog, it does take place during the war, which specifically is World War II. And instead of focusing on an RAF soldier, it focuses on a U.S. major. And instead of Peter Williamson, instead it's Jefferson Pike. And basically, the movie begins with learning about the plans of Normandy, which is basically where the U.S. soldiers are going to be going up to Normandy, France, and make their major attack over there. And while he's in Lisbon, that is when they slip a drug into his coffee, and so they decide to take him into this German location that's disguised as a American hospital over in Germany, and they decide to put some dye in his hair. They augmented his eyes a little bit to make it seem like he's almost going blind, to make it appear like he's 5 years older. And so when he comes to, he is told that the war has been over for 5 years, and instead it's May 1950, even though in reality it's only been like 2 or 3 days since it happened.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, obviously talking about, I mean, I like the fact that, this is something that Nazi Germany would do. Like, they would take, an element of land, and they would obviously, construct this entire thing, because I remember reading about the trains that would take, the Jews, obviously, to the concentration camps, and they would actually disguise the stations as, like, looking like, something that was far more pleasant than I actually was. And so, it didn't surprise me that, I'm not too sure if that drew inspiration, I think, from that, and the fact that they would, it would be something that Nazi Germany would do. Like, they would create this kind of, like, pleasant, like, scenario, like this kind of fake fantasy, if you will, and then obviously, try and fool Pike into that, this is actually a real thing that's happening right now, not realizing that he's actually being, he's basically being psychologically, tortured at this point, obviously with everything that's going on around him, and, this big, big charade that they're having at the moment.
Exactly. I wouldn't be surprised if during World War II that Germans would actually try to convince the Allies, like the British or the French or the Americans, and trying to fool them, saying that, this amount of time has passed, and, they try to be friendly enough to say, hey, what do you know about this particular invasion that's going on? Do you know where the troops are landing? So the fact that Roald Dahl was in World War II and he was an RAF pilot, I guess because, with Beware the Dog, in which Peter Williamson was an RAF pilot, which is not too surprising. I guess that maybe there are some parts in the war that Roald Dahl based off of some of his experiences. So I wouldn't be too surprised if they actually did do something like this.
Yeah. I just think it's one of the amazing things about this is that a lot of it is obviously based around well, at least some of it anyway is coming from a experience of actually being in the army, and obviously kind of being briefed on intelligence and things like that, and that's something that Roald Dahl during that time would have been, like being an RAF pilot, he would have known sort of where to fly, and so he would have known basically some of the kind of inner mechanics of field intelligence and things like that. So that translates well into not just into Beware of the Dog, but obviously into the movie we're talking about now, 36 Hours, and I think for me was. It's quite telling when you have somebody who is experienced in something and uses that experience, obviously, to tell a dramatic story like this. And so it really shows that it kind of powers the imagination doing that.
Yeah, and this was during Roald Dahl's phase in which he was writing a lot more suspense stories. A lot of people compared him to Alfred Hitchcock with the way he wrote his stories and the way he told his short tales that were adapted into books and into magazines. Tales of the Unexpected, which was an anthology series that Roald Dahl did, was compared a lot to Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and even some of the short stories were even in Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So for a lot of people, they may not think of this movie as like a definitive Roald Dahl adaptation, but that's because we're more familiar with his more fantasy, whimsical stories like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the BFG, The Witches, Matilda, James and the Giant Peach. This is definitely like towards the stuff that he would write back in the 60s, like his more
I would be very
stuff.
surprised if, I'd be very surprised if 36 Hours actually was able to actually be aired in Germany. Like, there's a reason why Willy Wonka and the BFG and can gain worldwide appeal, because a lot of people, there was a lot less Nazis in those movies.
Well, actually, we'll actually discuss about this in the next episode, that Willy Wonka wasn't allowed to air in Germany until the remake of, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory came out, if you can believe it.
Okay, then, well, maybe I'd be wrong about that. But, in regards to 36 Hours, I probably imagine it would probably had a lot less appeal, I think, because at the end of the day, it was still somewhat kind of like, yay, America, a little bit when you look at this film, like, And so it was. You can tell there was that aspect of it still within. I think going 20 years off the war. I think, and so I think
Yeah,
that
exactly.
those types of movies. I mean, like they're good for an American audience, but in regards to, I mean, we're going to talk about. I mean, is it really fair to talk about the box office for this film? Really, given the fact that the movie going public isn't as big as like it is now today in 2019. The
Yeah,
fact that
yeah,
that,
yeah,
that,
for
that
sure.
movie blockbusters can like $1 billion now at the box office. Compared to like what was it, the $2 million that now that 1965 could give you at that time. I think I'll tell you what. Why I tell you more about the movie? Let me work this out for inflation while you're doing that. Give me
Yeah,
one
no
second.
problem. Okay, so the one thing that I really did appreciate was that the guy who was responsible for this particular task, his name is Walter Gerber, and he was the one who came up with the idea of changing the appearance of Pike, making him look like he's older, and becoming a lot more friendly to him when he comes to. And he has an assistant who is a nurse by the name of Anna, who was a former Jewish prisoner of Auschwitz and Ravensbrück, and she, tries to comfort him, and she actually pretends that she is Pike's wife because they were able to take his mother's engagement ring, and she was wearing it throughout the entire time. And throughout, like the first third of the movie, it's basically Pike trying to come to the realization that it was 5 years after the war, and there's all these people who come up to him and say hi, and he has no recollection of them. And Gerber has this really convincing attitude discussing about, like, he went through some sort of amnesia that he would sometimes remember, sometimes forget, and he's currently in the he currently has this memory where he's stuck in the past as opposed to everything that happened 5 years that came out afterwards. And so they're trying to ask him all these questions about the war and about where the soldiers are going to be landing in next so that they can be able to prepare for a counterattack. And there's one of the characters in the movie, his name is Shaq. And he thinks that Gerber's idea is completely stupid. He doesn't think that it's going to work at all because they tried it out with 18 other soldiers. And while it was a success, they got little to no information. But Gerber thinks that it'll work because he is a U.S. Army major and he probably has a lot more information than compared to the foot soldiers. And so just like in the title of the movie, he has 36 hours to interrogate Pike and get the information they need right before the SS takes over the whole operation.
I don't know. I don't know how to feel about the fact that right off the get go, the kind of like the dressing room wall has kind of like been broken down at this point. Like like we know that that's what Pike is in is fake. Like this whole thing is staged to obviously get information out of him. It's this whole scenario. It's kind of like it's I guess it's kind of what made the Truman Show kind of boring because we kind of like knew that he was like in a TV show this entire time. And like now here we are here seeing Pike, and we know like from the get go that this whole thing is a ruse, really to
Yeah,
get into talk
exactly.
about that. It would have been nice, maybe it probably would have been probably more forward thinking if they decided, oh hey, this guy woke up and he thinks it's like 5 years from now. Maybe give him a little bit of backstory in the beginning of the movie, and then kind of like have him kind of like figure out that what's actually happening isn't actually to be. There's a far more going on than there actually is being said. It's kind of like
Yeah.
it kind of reminds me of like I mean, I guess we kind of already knew from the get-go. I mean, remember it was in the DC comics where I think Superman like woke up one day and like found that he's actually still on Krypton, but then realizes that he's actually just like some kind of parasite that's kind of like attached to him, feeding like dreams into
Yeah,
his
yeah,
head.
something like that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I
like
remember something like that.
yeah, like I remember they did like the animated version of it, but they kind of said from the get-go that that was what was going on. But in the comic books, I mean, I could be wrong. Someone can point that out to me. But I think in the comic book, I don't think they actually did it that way. I think they only kind of like introduced that concept like further into the comic before, obviously saying, "Oh, hey, it's not actually real." So
Right, exactly.
uh,
And they
I
actually
don't.
did do that in Beware of the Dog. In Beware of the Dog, Peter Williamson, he had to eject out from the plane, and all of a sudden he finds himself in the hospital room. He's told by the nurse that he was in Brighton and his leg was amputated and he couldn't like really go anywhere. But then he starts noticing that things are a little bit weird. Like some of the people, the way that they're talking is a little bit strange, and he notices that the water is really hard. And he was told by the nurse that, usually water in Brighton is soft, but then he notices that the water is hard. And so then he starts getting the pieces into his mind together. And then he immediately notices that he's in France when he sees the French sign that is translated to beware of dog. Yeah. So Peter was basically, he had no idea on what was going on until like towards the last the last paragraph of the short story. Well, us as an audience for Pike, we already knew that this was going to go on from the moment that they drugged him, they took him into the helicopter, and they sent the telegraph over to his U.S. official saying that he was dead, and then they started doing all of those little things to him to make him look older, and then they put him into the room, and then he starts questioning himself. But you're right, Aaron. I think it would have been interesting if maybe he had no idea about it. Like as an audience, we would like put like little clues together as to what was happening.
Exactly. Like the fact that they did that from the get-go, I dislike that, to be quite honest with you. I would have liked to have seen him, like, if we found out with him basically what was going on. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that was kind of like, the 1960s way of like showing off movies in which like the suspense and the thrill was all about, whether they would get caught or not, or whether, they would able to have their plan successful, not about like, oh, this character is going through something, what's going on, and putting like a little mystery to it.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about? Obviously, we're going to talk about. Oh, by the way, I actually worked out the inflation for the $2 million that I actually made. Today's money, it would have made $16 million at the box office. Barely anything.
That's not bad. Yeah, that's not bad.
Well, that's only like $1 million after the payout of the movie, really. So that wasn't considered.
I mean, yeah. That's true. I suppose so. But I mean, I don't think this was like a film that had like a major budget, to be quite honest, because most of the filming was done in Yosemite Park.
Yeah, well, most of those films back in the day weren't like massive. I mean, massive productions, were they? Like, compared to what they are today. I mean, like, the Wizard of Oz was all done in studio. So, like,
exactly. Yeah, so basically, even though that the movie is said to have been, set in London and then eventually over to Germany, and then they ended off in Switzerland, but no, in reality, it was all filmed in Yosemite National Park.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, looking at one thing I really liked to talk about was the relationship with the so-called doctor in this, and I do apologize.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Gerber, his name was
Gerber. Yeah, so I mean, like, it kind of makes you wonder who the main villain actually was in this. So, like, it was either going to be Gerber or it was actually going to be Shaq, and obviously Shaq was kind of portrayed as like the big villain in the final act, but obviously Gerber, I think, obviously was a very, I guess you could say, quite complex character. I guess you could say.
Yeah,
because,
very much so. Because he was an American, and then he came to Germany when he was 16 years old, and so he has his loyalties to Germany. But he knows how to speak English. He knows what the dialect is. He knows how to interact with people who are of the American language. This is why he convinces Pike that he's an American doctor, and he does a wonderful job at it. Mm-hmm. And then you have his calm and very reassuring ways of convincing Pike that he's like a friend, because he spent months and months studying about him. He even said earlier in the movie that he knows him just as well as his own brother. So we actually do know that he studied so hard on Pike to comfort him and to make him sure that, he's going to be able to give him the information that he needs without being a complete threat.
Mm-hmm. I think with Gerber, I think the interactions he has with Pike, it's and even towards the very end, the fact that he was even at the point where he looked like he was going to lose his own life, he was still trying to like pry information out of Pike at that point, and then you finally kind of see like the demise of him as he basically takes himself up all the way to the very end. And it's like you can just kind of see this kind of like maniacalism within him to obviously try and complete his mission, and he's so fixated on trying to do it. So like you could definitely say that he would have been someone who would have been quite I guess beloved in the National Socialist movement of Germany, I guess. So.
Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I thought was really, really clever was that Pike was able to discover that this whole thing was a hoax by the paper cut that he got earlier in the film. It was a very small paper cut, but it was very noticeable because he kind of like, slid his hands toward the maps while they were discussing about the plans of invading Normandy. And then he like touched his finger and he realized that the paper cut was still there. I mean, if it was like 6 years later, it would have been healed within like a few days or so. And so that's when he interrogated Anna and saying like, what's the date? And then she tells him it's June 2nd. So it's only been like 2 days as opposed to 6 years. And so then, he tells her to come up, he basically tells her, run in hysterics and tell the doctor that, I've known about this all along because of the paper cut in my finger. As in reality, when basically the reason how he knew about it was that he interrogated her saying, how many days has it been? So, and also Anna's story is a little bit tragic considering that she was a former Jewish prisoner in a concentration camp, and the reason why she was able to get out was because she was able to speak English and she was an actual nurse, and so she was able to work with the enemy to help comfort these interrogated soldiers to give out information so that they can be able to counteract their enemies. Mm-hmm. And you do kind of feel sorry for her.
Oh yeah, you feel massively sorry for her. She's like, she's a former concentration prisoner of a concentration camp which killed 6 million Jews. So yeah, I feel massively sorry for her.
Well, I mean, remember in the scenes of the movie where she was talking about like all the things that she had to do to survive, like when she was taken into a clinic of old people, and instead of giving them soup because they could barely pick up a spoon, that she fed them water and she took the soup for herself so she can be able to live.
Mm. So like, it's very awful stuff, and it's like really compelling as well when she's she's one of the best actresses in the movie.
Oh yeah, I think that the three main actors, James Garner, Eva Marie Saint, and Roald Taylor, they're all done amazingly. A lot of people may know who James Garner is. You may know him for The Great Escape or Victor Victoria, but most people probably know him nowadays as Duke in The Notebook, or the commander in Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Mm-hmm. And as for Eva Marie Saint, she's been in a lot of TV shows and movies. She's been in like, let's see, from what I can remember, North by Northwest was probably one of her most famous roles in it. And she was also in, Grand Prix, Nothing in Common. But I think most people nowadays know her as Ma Kent in Superman Returns or Katara in The Legend of Korra.
Mm-hmm. And so it's just amazing how it's amazing how these actors and actresses kind of transcend into into our today's media as well, and the fact that we're even talking about it now, like it's
for sure.
Stuff like this just stand the test of time in some ways, but in other ways they also don't as well, which we'll always get into later on in this. But
So. Okay, so Pike figures out that he has not been asleep for 6 years and that he's not suffering from amnesia, but instead that he is being interrogated by the Germans. And so Shaq
I think one clever thing I'd like to point out, which is when he goes to inspect the guard at the gate, and he basically says, "Oh, hey, hello, General," and he does basically the salute that the Nazis do by clapping their heels together. And you can see how, and like even that, like is just a massive giveaway of like where he is. And
exactly.
So like it's just everything just starts to fall into place after that, and even he has to realize what's going on. And so One thing I want to point out though is that the amount of violence against women in this movie, like the fact that Pike pretty much manhandles. Man Anna, and then at one point, he smacks her across the face, trying to get some kind of like hysteria out of her, and Anna takes it, not mercifully, but obviously just takes it in her stride, and the fact that she's seen so much horror in her life that she's got no more tears to give. Basically.
Exactly. Yeah. She was talking about like how she can't cry anymore because, she already gave up all of her tears from seeing all the women, men, and children die in Auschwitz and Ravensbrück, so that she can't cry anymore. And so when Pike tells her to start going hysterical, she says she can't. And so he slaps her, and then she starts running out screaming and telling the doctor about what happened. And then that's when they start getting the interrogation going on, the actual interrogation that they wanted to do originally. So Shek comes along and tries to put a light into his face and basically just tell him off for, saying like, where is the invasion going to be at? And in reality, the invasion is at Normandy, but they don't believe it's going to be at Normandy. They believe it's going to be in a different location. So they actually decide to go over to that location while while Normandy is completely free from most of the German soldiers. So it's actually interesting because Gerber knew that this were Normandy was going to be the place where the American soldiers would be at, but because Shek thinks that the interrogation that he did for Pike was the true interrogation, that they were going to be going over to a different place, that they were past de Calais. That's where they were planning on going. That's another place in France. It's a little bit more northern. So they decided that they were going to put all of their troops over there. And that's when Gerber, kind of like has a bit of an epiphany about like, basically Anna is involved with this too, because that's when they were able to find the cyanide pill that was in the floor, which earlier in the film, that's what Anna had in case if she was ever taken back.
Yeah, she put it in the glasses, and if you remember, and then she tried to give it to Pike, and in order to try and shut him up, and so but unfortunately he fell out, and obviously he failed. So yeah. So I mean, the obviously getting to the point where they obviously know where Normandy is going to be it, but then they start getting suspicious because they think that it's not Normandy. They think he's not actually telling the truth, and then the whole thing starts to fall apart, and they actually think that it's actually going to be Calais, which they're actually going to be trying to invade, and so that ends up being kind of like the default position, and that's when Goober ends up kind of being in the doghouse really for obviously his 36-hour experiment, obviously just falling to pieces. So and even then, after that happens, he's still trying to try and get the correct information out of it by obviously doing false bombings and making it all like they're actually going and things like that. So it's still all of that still plays out, and like the whole the whole drama still goes on as well throughout all of that, and it makes you wonder if that message that goes directly to the commander of the German army, of whether he's actually going to move the soldiers down to Normandy or not to go confront the invasion, and then they decide, oh no, it's to get. Then he gets Shek intercepts it and says, oh, it's not gonna. They both believe it's not gonna happen, so they end up ripping it up. So it's the whole drama, which is out of their hands now, obviously still plays out for the audience to take in. And so it's those are the bits that I do like, when all this gets talked about. In that, it's just it's unfortunate that it kind of feels like it takes away from the whole illusion of this this fake prison, this fake hospital and everything. And so it's I can understand probably from a movie telling perspective, it's kind of hard to probably tell one. You can't just kind of tell one story and then blatantly tell like the other side of it really, without obviously trying to cause I'm trying to find the best word for it. Obviously trying to obviously write off the other side of it, if you know what I mean. And so it's kind of a shame really that this really could have been like a two-story movie really. Like one half could have been told like on one side of the story, and then the other story could have been told of like how they try to fool him. So they could have kept like the illusion, and then obviously have the story, and then obviously have the two kind of meet together, if you will. Kind of like there was a good movie that actually Quentin Tarantino's what's it called the Hateful Eight. So like you kind of like Hateful Eight, like this whole illusion's going on, like this is they're all in this house, and it's then they realize this was before the bandits came in and killed everybody because they want to get their their gang member out of from the clutches of being hanged. And so it's kind of like if they probably played the illusion probably at the beginning of the movie and then led on halfway through that this actually wasn't going on, and like this whole thing was just a ruse, and like just to kind of like get the get this person free. Like maybe if they kind of kept that going on, not led on, maybe I probably would have enjoyed it probably a bit more than I did. But they kind of mixed them actually all together really, and it kind of came out some good and some bad really. So
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. So then the next thing that happens is that they basically so Shek sends over his soldiers over to Normandy to see if any of the US soldiers are going to be there to start their invasion. They don't show up, and so they think that Gerber is lying, and so they have his arrest. And then they have Anna and Pike locked up in a room so that they can be able to be interrogated more. And so then basically Gerber decides to help them out. He decides to, set them free as a revenge to Shek, not as to, help them out as opposed to feeling a bit guilty. I guess he does feel a little bit guilty, but it's mostly just for revenge against Shek. So he gives him a package of the 18 soldiers that were interrogated, and then he gives them a spare key, and he also gives them plans about go over to the woods at night and escape over to your minister friend and try to see if you can make it out to Switzerland. And so then the escape happens, and we even have Gerber calling over the front desk to distract them while Pike strangles his neck to death. And then finally he goes over to the minister's house, who is a soldier who still praises Hitler, but at the same time he wants to be able to help them escape. So they come up with this plan about escaping through the woods, meeting over at some rocks, and then there will be a truck that would come and pick them up, and so they can be able to make it across the border to Switzerland.
Yeah. And so the minute this helps them out, and obviously Shek catches on that obviously they've escaped, and he's going to go after them himself, which is kind of weird when you really think about it, because you thought he would have brought some kind of backup with him at some point. The fact that I'm sure they weren't somewhat, or maybe they were short of them. I don't know, but.
I mean, he did have a few soldiers, look around in some locations earlier in the film, but they couldn't find them. And so then when he realizes that they were at the minister's house, because that was the information that Gerber told to Shek earlier in the film when they were doing the interrogation the first time, he decides to take it on himself. And so he then takes the car, and right before he heads over to the minister's house, and he learns about their disappearance, that's when we have him going over to Gerber's room, and Gerber injected himself with something lethal, and he's about to die. And so then when he realizes that they're at the minister's place hiding, Gerber tries to shoot him dead, but he dies from the injection, and he just shoots up in the air, and he falls to the ground.
Pretty dramatic death when you really look at it.
Yeah, it is pretty dramatic, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, obviously they do escape, and they do make it into Switzerland, and also Shag meets a pretty gruesome demise, being shot by his own stormtrooper, pretty much. And then to make it look like he didn't murder him, he actually hung him up on the barbed wire fence to make sure that it was he made it out like, oh, he tried to escape, so I shot him, so he couldn't get out. And yeah. And then he leaves with the classic line of you can't trust anybody nowadays, So,
Yes, and then finally we have the conclusion where they're at Switzerland, and Anna's going to go to an internment camp, and Pike is going to go over to the American embassy. So they go their separate ways, and then we have the scene concluding with Anna crying for the first time, and she cries because she's being separated from Pike, and they went through so much together. And so that's basically how the movie ends.
Yeah, it's a very it's very interesting. You could say it's quite very, very forward thinking, but mind you, I guess you could say that Casablanca was kind of forward thinking, saying not having the main lead and the main woman get together, I guess. But obviously this one does the same thing, really. It's not going to be, and then it's kind of ends on that note. So
yeah.
Okay, so I mean, in regards to overall, 36 Hours isn't necessarily, out of all the films that Roald Dahl's been involved in, this isn't necessarily my favorite one. I'll be honest with you. I still have my heart set on, the BFG 1989 as well, being one of his better ones. really. And so like I think that 36 hours. I think obviously with Beware of the Dog. I think there was some, obviously some leeway they actually took with the book, bring it onto the movie. They're definitely, letting on too much about the whole thing was a ruse, and too many liberations, at least I think for my liking. So, while 36 hours would be enjoyable to sit through, I think at least when I watched it, I don't particularly think it's going to be my favorite all-time Roald Dahl inspired movie. I don't think. So.
Yeah, as for me, I did enjoy some parts of it. The suspense was actually pretty decent. I did like some of the characters, and I do like some parts of the music a little bit. But there are some things that do kind of hold it back, like you were saying before. Like there should have been a little bit more build up towards where Pike discovers that it wasn't, he wasn't in a coma for 5 years, but instead, it was just only 2 days, and he was just drugged so that he can be interrogated. And also, I think that there are some parts of the story that could have been fleshed out a little bit more, or maybe there's some parts of it that could have been removed to keep things a little tighter. But I think that a movie that came out in the 60s and, especially like a war thriller, the kind of stuff that Roald Dahl was doing at the time, I think it's pretty decent. If any of you guys are interested in checking it out, then you could. But when it comes to like the definitive Roald Dahl adaptations, this is not one that I would go to first.
Yeah.
I would say probably go to like maybe 6th, 7th, or 8th, because there's plenty of others that are much better.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of which, next time we are going to be going into one of those famous adaptations. We're going to jump in about 6 years to 1971 to discuss about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, so nice bit of sweetness to go into.
Yes, sweetness for the audience, but bitterness for Roald Dahl himself.
Yeah, and we'll get further into that once we get to it. So
yes. So until then, I hope that you guys enjoyed listening to our discussion of 36 Hours, and we will see you in the next one.
See you, everybody.